Today's content is sponsored by our media partner, Antronics. Check out their top-of-the-line passives, taps, and much more at www.antronics.com.
For the other torques on the line passives, the strand clamp bolt uses a 7/16 inch hex driver. Please tighten this to 240 inch-pounds. The faceplate bolts uses a 5/16 nut driver. Please tighten these to 40 inch-pounds. The hex port plugs uses a 1/2 inch hex bolt. Please tighten these to 45 inch-pounds. Note that the faceplate is keyed for orientation. If you need to remove AC power to any of the ports and your line passive, you can remove the fuse. This is the internal block diagram for the directional couplers. The fuse 1, fuse 2, fuse 3 provides AC to the respective output ports. This is the two-way splitter fuse location. This is the three-way splitters. This is the power inserter.
I want to pause for a second and say, this is something that I've known about Springbok for a while, in that it's a unique feature of your TDRs that when you store a trace, you can basically open up your cable under test, connect it to your TDR, hit the store button, and it's 20 seconds or so, and it actually does test all of the pulse widths and then stores that information. So then you can store your trace, put your cable back together, and do all of your analysis later, either on the TDR or, as you mentioned, Bluetooth it to your smart device or USB to your laptop to look at tracker view and do all of your analysis after shooting the cable. So that is a feature that I've really liked about the TDR, the Springbok TDR in particular, is because all of the post analysis, all the information's there. You don't have to open it up and shoot it again to get a different pulse width on that particular box.
It saves you time and it saves your MSO money. Okay,
yep.
So to that point, you still have these options with every other TDR. This is what I'm telling you. At the very least, what I'm about to show you, this is what Springbok does really a lot easier, and I'm going to show you what I mean in just a second. As long as you store this, and actually I meant to show you this in a second pulse width. I just showed my hand on this. From this point, you can still store this as long as you have a 2 nanosecond pulse width. Shoot, some TDRs have a 1 nanosecond pulse width, okay? And again, some of the older ones even have a sub-nanosecond pulse width, all great TDRs. So from this point, I can see that I have at least 3, possibly 4 different events right here. As long as you store it in that waveform, store it. If you have another waveform you can store it in, store it. If you have another one, store it. But all of that stuff takes you time, and you got to remember to do that. Plus, it could be raining, so it could take you a little bit more time. But at this point, I'm looking at this, and my customer says to me, I'll just call him Jim, I hear him cuss underneath his breath, and I'm like, what's the matter? He said, I have been looking at this for like 10, 15 minutes, and you find this right away? And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't know if this is the problem, but let's just look at this together. This is what I also love about this particular TDR. What does the vertical gain need to be set at? It doesn't matter. But can you see how if I have it too high, and this is looking at a stored waveform, mind you, that kind of cloudies it just a little bit. There's a certain point where I can see just a little bit more. And then also, if I change my range, my zoom factor, this is what I like about our stored waveform versus live. I've got this continuous slide to where I can see patterns develop that I can't necessarily see live because they're just set zoom ratios. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So check this out. From this standpoint, I can see how this is harder to see. Maybe this is a little easier to see, but check this out. I don't have to go out and shoot this again to see what it looks like out of 5. Minor detail. Look what happens when I go from a 2 to a 5. It makes it stand out just a little bit more, right? And again, with the range, maybe, but I get more of the pattern right here. So this is what I'm starting to wonder. Could these be reflections? Well, Let me explain something to you. These are not ghost reflections, because ghost reflections tend to happen further apart than that, except they look mysteriously the same distance from each other. Now, I went in there and I got really specific, and they were not exactly the same distance. Ghost reflections have no choice but to be exactly the same. So I'm a little bit confused. So once he realizes that this is the problem, I say, what's your next step? He says, my next step is, now that I see these, I'm going to get up there in my bucket truck and at least see what I can figure out. So I'm so curious by this. So I send this to another buddy of mine in Florida. I said, what do you make about the repeating pattern of this? And he says to me, what's their pole spacing down there? And I'm like, oh, dude, because what do squirrels kind of tend to do? They'll chew right around a certain pole a certain way, one way or the other, and then around the next. That's what they tend to do. So we figure out, we think that's what the problem is. This is where it gets fun. The very next week, I say, call me when you find this problem and tell me what it was, because people don't always call me once the problem is solved. In fact, you guys never call me. You only call me when you need something, but as soon as you find the problem, you never call me back. Letting that go. Okay, I sound like I'm talking to my kids. Sorry about that. So anyway, check this out. I was in another city a week later, and I decided to pull this out before my next class. And I thought, he didn't call me back. Let me take a closer look at this. I didn't think about this at the time because I knew we solved the problem. I was confident. Look what happens when I change this from a 5 to a 20 nanosecond. Watch very carefully. Damn, that's where I started. That's where I should have started. Now, as it turns out, he did call me weeks later. These were, in fact, all individual squirrel chews. But that's where we should have started. Look at the distance. We're talking 382 feet versus 452. We should have at least started there. Did they end up having to replace this whole span? Of course they did. But all he had to do was just hit store, analyze it later, get everything all plugged up. You can still do this on any one of your TDRs, but you have to have the presence of mind to shoot it in the 1, the 5, the 20, whatever it is they offer. Okay? Now, check this out. Did you also notice that when I went from 5 to a 20 right here, even this potentially popped up right here? All of this just from hitting store. And then what he did from this point, from his phone, he just hit send it to me as a tracker view file. Now I have all this freedom. What I want to make sure that people understand is, if all you learn how to do is hit store, this is how you get good at analyzing waveforms. Store it, analyze it later in your free time. Analyze it in your truck where it's not raining anymore or where the heater is on. This is how you learn to figure out, my high end was rolling off right here, but then once I figured it out on my phone, this is how I found water. Send it to me, send it to your coworkers. All of us get better together really quick. And here's another thing that I always make sure people understand. Once they understand the tracker view or the software, now that you're armed with a little bit of knowledge, try to resist the urge to go out there and shoot all of your hardest stuff first. As long as you're out there, just hit store. And even if you have a series of taps that is working supposedly okay, see what a good tap is supposed to look like. Don't go for the hard stuff. And then believe me, as soon as you find water in a tap or a loose connector, those things start to jump out right away. The storage feature is just killer. That's the game changer.
Yeah, I agree. Been a big fan of that feature for a long time on the Springbok MTDRs. The other thing that I'll say is, particularly when we're talking about shielding integrity defects like squirrel chews or radio cracks or other things, this is a great tool, but it's not the only tool in the bag, right?
Of course, yeah.
Leakage detector in conjunction with an MTDR is such a great marriage of test equipment. So, if you suspect that you may have a shielding defect like a squirrel chew or a power burn or something else, as you're driving to the location, turn your sniffer on. That may give you a clue as to what you're looking for. And then once you get the right piece of test equipment connected to the cable, it'll allow you to find it a little more precisely.
100%. And I'm just going to share one more with you because I want to make sure that people understand how valuable the tool this is. We won't have time to get into it today, but I have one particular gentleman. in a Comcast system who was sharing a waveform with me. He was looking for a problem. I'm going to give you the short version of how he found it. But the first thing that I want to do, again, this isn't active on the very end of the line over here at 561 feet. As I just slowly start to increase the vertical gain, this may be a little bit harder to see, but you can clearly see that from this standpoint, there could be an issue here, there could be an issue here. This is one of those harder things that it is to find. You may not see this right away if you don't know what it is you're doing, but the mere fact, I am always going to tell you to start off in your smallest pulse width possible, but it's not your smallest pulse width, which might be the best thing to find it for you. Even on this particular cable, he was able to find out that this was a bad splice just by changing it from a 2 to a 5 because the 5 made it jump out a little bit more. And again, you have this option just from the software. This happened to be his problem, not this one. We'll get into that another time. But again, some of these other things right here didn't mean anything at all. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, when you talk about back and forth between 2 and 5, that third location jumped out above between 5 and 600 feet as well.
I know. But again, it's a great tool. It's a great tool to use. So, Mike, we are at the top of 2 hours. I want to just basically show a few different. The idea in these trainings, by the way, is to get people started just so they understand the basics of it and a little bit of waveform analysis, and then, oh, now I realize. And most people don't even know that the TDR they're using, they didn't even know anything about the pulse widths. Very first thing that most people do after a class is they'll turn on their TDR, and I won't mention anything by brand, but they'll look at it and they'll say, this is a 500 nanosecond pulse width right there. I didn't even know I was in it. I didn't even know I was in a 500 nanosecond, let alone I didn't even know anything about nanoseconds. Yeah, I understand that. Now I like to go back into whichever TDR you're using. Let me show you how to get to the smaller pulse width so you can do that and then work your way up. Because here's the deal. In most cases, most technicians are shooting under 1,000 feet most of the time. So since you are shooting at that, chances are you probably only need to be somewhere in a 1, 2, or a 5 anyway.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why you're not finding problems.
So we covered a lot of stuff today, Chuck, and I appreciate particularly the in-depth analysis of some of these stored waveforms. I do think there's opportunity for us maybe on another episode to get into some best practices of how to connect your MTDR into the cable under test, whether it be through the use of alligator clips or other probes or F adapters to different types of cables, because those can also be meaningful in the acquisition of your test trace, right?
Absolutely. And of course I do want to do that.
Okay. So I think
started, Mike?
What's that?
Was this helpful to get us started?
Oh, absolutely. I think the overview of what the MTDR is and how it works and differences in cables and some of the impairments that it can find, the importance of understanding your instrument, whether it's a Springbok or some other instrument, of knowing how to get to your settings to adjust your velocity of propagation or your VP, and also your pulse widths and how to navigate some of the stored traces has been really helpful. So I think that's going to really help our audience, Chuck, just to understand their TDRs a little bit better. And I think next time we get back together, we can get a little deeper in the weeds on maybe some of the nuances and different test scenarios to get the best results out of their TDR.
I agree.
So as always, we appreciate the fine folks over at Springbok Instruments as the great partners that you are to SCTE and to the Penn Ohio chapter and to the telecommunications industry as a whole. So Chuck, can't thank you guys enough. Appreciate your time and energy, and get connected with Springbok.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mike. We really appreciate it, and we were happy to help.
All right. Until next time, folks, stay safe out there on purpose.